Should we do a COVID update?
Probably.
Let's play the music first. Stand by. Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. Thank you for joining us, and pardon me for my having a frog in my throat right away there. Goodness, that's no way to start an episode. Thanks for joining us, listeners. Joining me today, of course, is Dr. Scott Melson. Hello, sir.
What's up, dude? How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm better than I was this time last week. It's not as hot.
It is. It's like this is a very mild July.
Yeah, it's a chill day today, so that's good. I was able to convince someone this morning who was previously not vaccinated for COVID and has had some hesitancy. Was able to convince them to get vaccinated. I was able to get a couple of parents to get their teenagers vaccinated this week, and a couple other folks who weren't quite sure yet. I was able to help them cross the finish line and get to the vaccine. So that's good. So
well done.
From that standpoint, I'm okay. The COVID situation remains very tenuous. So from that standpoint, what's that quote from Mad Men? It's not great, Bob. It's not great.
That's exactly right. I think you and I send that gift to one another at least twice a week. It's not great, Bob. Yeah, man. What a week. Well, let's talk about COVID for a moment. Congrats on that vaccine conversion.
I do a little happy dance outside.
Nice.
When I leave the patient's room and close the door, I do a little happy dance.
It's like a football touchdown dance, except you don't spike down the syringe into the. I guess you're not the one that administers the vaccine.
Yeah, and I, some of those guys look pretty badass when they do their dances. I don't.
Just a kneel and cross your chest kind of guy.
Yeah, it's just more
something
of a
subtle.
It's just more of a we got one.
That's right. Chuck one up for the good guys. Well, so things are looking increasingly not great, right, when it comes to COVID?
Yeah, so some data from yesterday from the health department, State Department of Health. So in the last week, we've had 2,688 new cases. I believe there's 750 new cases today. Roughly 72% of positive COVID samples that have been submitted to the State Department of Health for genomic testing are in fact the Delta variant. So that confirms what you and I have been saying here speculatively for several weeks now, but it does confirm that Delta is the overwhelming number of new infections in Oklahoma. Only 39.2% of Oklahomans are fully vaccinated. We've given 3.3-ish million total doses. That translates to like 1.5 million people that are fully vaccinated. One piece of news that is really good. Do you know how many breakthrough cases we've had, Andy? What would you we've had? What would you guess?
I would. So since vaccine started in January, I would guess we've had 33.
So not 33, but pretty good. So 1,092 breakthrough cases.
I was way off. I literally just guessed off the top of my head.
1,092, but that translates to 0.071%.
Oh, that's pretty outstanding.
0.071% of these cases are occurring in fully vaccinated people.
So less than 1%.
Yes. Well under 1%. Less than 0.1%.
Oh, so less than 1/10 of 1%.
Less than 1/10 of 1%.
So that's of... Well, is that number of the total infections since the beginning? Or is that just since...
That's breakthrough infections in fully vaccinated people.
Okay, so since vaccine started.
Yeah.
Oh,
so...
that's very few, but that's still a lot of cases, I guess. But I guess it's still.
I mean, when you're talking about like a sample size of 1.5 million people,
right? Oh, is this nationwide then?
No, this is Oklahoma.
Oh, okay.
So you got 1.5 million fully vaccinated people. Of those, 1,092 of those have gotten COVID since getting the vaccine.
I'm glad that I was not paying close enough attention as you described this for our listeners' benefit, so that we can explain exactly what that means. 1 million people have been vaccinated, and less than 1/10 of 1% of those have had a breakthrough infection.
Yeah.
I'm going to text my wife that right now because I think it'll make her feel better, honestly.
Well, and the thing is, what that tells us, I had this conversation with a patient this morning. So I had a guy this morning who he was like, he's like, I haven't done it yet, Dr. Melson. He was like, now, if you or one of my other doctors can convince me that I should, then, I'll do it. But I'm really hesitant. And I said, okay, can I try to convince you? And he said, sure. And he said, also, let me tell you. He's like, he's cards on the table. He was like, I am as conservative can be when you talk about politics, religion, whatever. And he goes, but I want to be very clear. He's like, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. He's like, I'm not saying I don't want it because I think there's a tracking device or the government's trying to kill me. He's like, his big thing is that this is a guy who he's a little bit older. He's got some health problems, but in recent years has really done an incredible job of kind of taking charge of his health.
Sure.
In terms of has really changed his exercise pattern, his diet pattern. And because of that has made some really, really significant progress in some of his health issues. And he's feeling as good now as he's ever felt in his life. And he said, I've always gotten the flu vaccine and I feel like I get the flu like half the time anyway. And so why take a chance on this COVID vaccine that's maybe going to make me feel terrible? And I'm probably going to get the COVID anyway because the other vaccine doesn't seem to work for me. Oh, and by the way, I am healthier now than I have been in a long time. So why shouldn't I just take my chances with COVID? That was essentially the crux of his argument. And we had, a great conversation. And I said, man, in a good year, the flu vaccine is 70%. In a bad year, it's 30%. 50 to 60% is not uncommon in terms of efficacy.
Sure.
And I said, these are 95%. And we walked through why it's 95% effective. And then I think what really got him is I went through this exact data with him. And I said, look, if the clinical trial data is not enough for you, look at this. There's 1.5 million fully vaccinated people and 1,000 infections, 1,100 infections.
Yeah,
it's pretty good. And you're telling me you're not a conspiracy theorist, and I believe you, so you should accept that those numbers are real.
Right.
And he did, and he was like, all right, if you really think I should. And I was like, yeah, bro, I really think you should.
It's a tough deal. I mean, that's a tremendous story, but I was talking to a member of my extended family earlier today about this, that I think those of us who believe the science, believe the numbers, need to follow it on both sides, right? We need, and you have to say, I acknowledge that people believe math on both sides. Whether or not that math supports your underlying emotional beliefs is a different story, right? So
right.
We heard last year lots of folks say, this is a virus that will infect many people, but only a small percentage of them will get very sick, and only a small percentage of them will die, right? As it so happens, my mother was one of those, right? She got it, she died. My father also got it, didn't die. My grandmother got it, died a little bit later.
Not from complications related to COVID. We don't think.
No, I mean, she had congestive heart failure.
Right.
I'm sure that COVID didn't help, but she was on her way out anyway. So, just as a small case study, and certainly hundreds of thousands of people have died from COVID in the United States, to say nothing about the rest of the world. But the fact is, yes, it is a small percentage thing. At the same time, now that cases are on the rise and we're all very scared, we hear about breakthrough infections and we are terrified. And but we have to acknowledge that it is an infinitesimally small number of those that have been vaccinated have breakthrough infections. I myself, Scott, am more concerned about our children.
Yeah.
Somebody think of the children, right?
Right.
Because they're going to be going back to school, and
Yep.
they, my kids, are all under the age that's been approved.
Yeah.
Do we know, has the FDA indicated when we might see approval for that next school-age child?
So I was reading about this today. So
This is why I ask. I had a hunch you might have been reading about this.
yeah, so one thing that's a little bit different for kids. So they're asking for 6 months worth of data from the companies in terms of safety for kids
Sure.
as opposed to 3 months, which is what they asked for in adults.
Right.
6 months of data would also be enough for them to apply for full approval rather than an emergency use authorization.
Right.
And which has been, I think polling shows that a lot of parents, even if the FDA says you can use it, a lot of parents would have hesitancy to give their kids a vaccine that has not been fully FDA approved.
Yeah.
And so 6 months would be enough data that they can probably get full approval with that.
Yeah.
Trials are ongoing. I believe they said that they should have data, I think for 6 to 12-year-olds, something like September, October-ish.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
And then the FDA will review it, and then data for like 2 to 6 will be forthcoming after that. But it is entirely possible that you're looking at like November, December for approval in like the 6 to 12, so elementary age.
Right.
And then like maybe after that, even a couple of months after that for like daycare age, right?
Right.
Like 2 to 6.
Yeah.
So like it's coming and it's going to happen. But a lot of them could get sick between now and then.
Right. And I think they're also like for the youngest group, right? So the 0 to 2, I believe they're lumping that in with like basically monitoring pregnant women, right? Because
I think that's
there's a lot of overlap there, obviously.
And so like, you know, you make a great point, and this is what I tell parents all the time because I've had lots of parents that are very hesitant about trying to even getting their teenagers vaccinated. And I've, said the same thing I said here on the show. Like, the choices now are not get the vaccine or like try to avoid COVID. The choices are like get the vaccine or get COVID. Like one of those two things is going to happen, especially with kids going back to school with no masks, no distancing, no AB schedules, no virtual. Like kids are going to be back in school this fall, and it's going to be school as usual. And so I'm telling parents, like, if your kid hasn't had COVID, or even if they had, they're going to get it this fall.
Yeah, there's a really good story the other day. Newsweek, I think I may have sent it to you, that talked about this. That was like, the kids are all right, and talked about the low rates of infection that we saw in children last year, but also kids weren't going to regular school last year, right? There was a lot of things in place, masks included, and that are preventative. And also we didn't have the Delta variant, we didn't have the Lambda variant, so there are new factors that we don't yet have enough data about to make a fully informed decision.
Particularly because the household transmission rate of Delta is estimated to be 100%. Right.
So if one person
gets it in the household, everyone in the household will get it, particularly if everyone in the household is unvaccinated. So this is a situation where if your kid gets it at school and they bring it home to your unvaccinated house, everybody is going to get it. Or if a parent gets it at work and they bring it home, even if the parent is vaccinated and they get a breakthrough case, they're at risk of giving it to their unvaccinated teenager or children. And so, it's, the situation is, it's not great, man. There's hospitals in Springfield, Cox Health System in southwestern Missouri. They put an application in this week to open a field hospital, right?
Which is like a hospital in the parking lot.
Yeah,
right?
like a big freaking tent hospital.
Yeah.
Like to take care of COVID patients because they don't physically have room in their hospital and ICU anymore.
Yeah.
Like, and that's what we were talking about last year, right? So
at the same time, yeah.
Right, and so this is what like we have communities around the country where vaccination rates are very low that are essentially in the same spot that they were before, and man, it kills me because there's no reason for it.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it.
I mean, on the good note, right, is that we have some adults that have been vaccinated this year, which we didn't have last year. So there may be some fewer vectors. The problem is, like if every teacher in the state was vaccinated, then I would feel better about kids going to school because there'd be fewer vectors, fewer doorways into the school, right? And that's not the case. So,
as an aside, and we'll kind of start delving into like other things. We saw today, I think it was the first thing I texted you this morning. So for listeners, Andy and our daily text string starts sometime between 5:30 and 6 in the morning most of the time. And I think
whoever wakes up first.
I think one of the first things I texted you this morning was that a couple of state legislators, I didn't see names attached. I have my suspicions who they are.
Sean Roberts.
Is it Sean Roberts? Do you know?
Yeah. He was I think the lead author on that, but yeah, there was like 20 people signed on.
Yeah, are asking. So several of our big health systems here in town, so St. Anthony's, Mercy, OU, all have mandates in place now for employees. So there are employees of one of the big health systems now have to be vaccinated. There are very, very limited exceptions for religion and medical conditions. But Sean Roberts and I guess some friends are asking Governor Stitt to issue an executive order that would ban hospitals and health systems from requiring the vaccine for their employment. And just the public health outrage made my blood boil. So I didn't check my blood pressure this morning, but I'm sure it
Very high.
Sure wasn't great.
Went right up.
But the other thing that just blows my mind, they said, this is a quote, "Many Oklahomans are about to have their paychecks used against them to make a medical decision that goes against their beliefs. Healthcare workers are left to choose between taking a vaccine authorized for emergency use or risk losing their job, comma, this goes against, quote, liberty and justice for all," end quote, period. So first of all, liberty and justice for all is in the Declaration of Independence. Is in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, right?
Yes.
It's not in the Declaration of Independence. It's not in the Constitution. I don't think that exact phrase. If I'm wrong, somebody correct me. Number one. Number two, there is no constitutionally protected right to have a job working for a hospital, right? The Constitution protects you from overreach and mandates and infringement on your rights by the government, not a private sector employer. If your employer wants to say that you have to get a vaccine or anything else as a condition of employment, they can do that, and the Supreme Court recently upheld that.
Right.
So this nonsense about infringement on people's rights, I'm sorry, if you don't want to get the vaccine because you just don't want to, if you have a legitimate medical condition that would make it dangerous, fine. Those are very few and far between. If you just don't want the vaccine because you don't want to get the vaccine, I guess don't be a healthcare worker in the middle of a pandemic, right? The nonsense that we hear from these people just blows my mind.
It is it's exceptional in lots of ways.
Anyway, we can stop COVID now and get into our outline.
I was like, none of that stuff was even on our outline for today. You guys, we're just
look at this great content.
We're just getting into it. All right. Well, we did want to go back to education. We really did want to talk about the State Board of Education, who I think was it earlier this week that they adopted the rules for passage of. So it was. I think this is a little nuanced. House Bill 1775, which was. We'll just say it was the critical race theory law, right, that passed the state legislature, even though it's not really about that. But, they don't use those words, but it is about that. And also, it's not a thing that's being taught. Regardless, the law passed, and related to that, they passed some administrative rules that govern the Department of Education, right? So I think listeners, most of you probably know this, but in Oklahoma, every year the legislature has to approve administrative rules that apply and govern to all these state agencies. And often these are rules that the agencies request. They're like, hey, we want to change this rule so that we can follow it. And they just say yes. Sometimes they also inflict rules upon agencies. So this was the State Board of Education adopting the rules that they had proposed that were under this, but it has to go back, I think, for final approval at some point. So that happened this week, and of course, folks were rightly outraged.
Yeah, and I think that this is, and you touched on this, but I think it is important that we say this explicitly. And we had a whole episode where we talked about House Bill 1775, and I think we kind of said this, but I don't think we ever explicitly said this. So HB 1775, like you said, is billed as the banning critical race theory bill, first of all. And critical race theory is not being those words are never used in the text of the bill, number one. Number two, the bill doesn't address critical race theory. Number three, as I would guess listeners of the pod probably know, but maybe don't. As you may have seen on social media, or other podcasts or the news or the interwebs, what have you, unless you are in graduate school of some kind, right? Unless you're
studying race theory of some kind.
Unless you are in grad school in sociology or sociology, or unless you're in law school, no one is teaching you or your children about critical race theory. Like
it's like saying that our 8th grade teachers are teaching them quantum physics, which is not the case.
Yeah. I mean, it's like this is a whole like subset of like academic research and academic inquiry, and like there are journals dedicated to critical race theory. People are talking about it like they're saying they're teaching Marxism, because critical theory is like part of continental European philosophy that started with, I think, I'm not a philosophy person, I think it was the Berlin School maybe, but like this is really like esoteric stuff that has nothing to do with Karl Marx or Friedrich Engels. It has nothing to do with communism, and it has nothing to do with K through 12 education.
Right.
But it is being used like that phrase, critical race theory, is being used to try and like gin up outrage about teaching equity, like about equitable education,
right,
and like teaching an accurate history of race and race relations in the United States. And what House Bill 1775 does, in my opinion, is essentially bars that. Yeah, and it's this really subjective set of criteria of things that you can't teach.
Yeah, and the rules that the State Board of Education passed this week that were so bad is because it was more than just the bill. Well, it was different than the bill. The rules have all these provisions, right, that are like, I won't say, they are incentivizing parents and teachers to turn in other teachers who they think are teaching critical race theory or anything else to do with like race that they don't like, right? And so this, Scott, I'll be honest, this reminds me of the Red Scare back in the 60s, right? Like, it's like, McCarthy would be like, please report anyone you believe to be a communist.
Yeah.
And then they would arrest them or put them in jail without due process. And it was a witch hunt. And that's what this is like trying to pit teachers against other teachers, right? Trying to pit parents against teachers. These teachers, God bless them, are trying to teach fucking arithmetic, right? And like times tables and spelling.
Okay, well, now just pause. On our show, Andy, we say multiplication tables.
Okay, but I'm
not. We don't say times tables.
Scott, I'm of the people. You can call what you want. It's that new math. But they honestly, like, if you ask my son, who's going into 4th grade, like, what do you learn about? Critical race theory is not remotely on. He's like, he might learn about. He loves Greek mythology, right? Which
Greek mythology is awesome.
It's very interesting. He's big into Percy Jackson and all of that stuff now. They don't teach Percy Jackson. He found it on his own. But the idea that somebody, I think Haley Charlton was the one that posted like these guys that think that teachers have the time to actually teach critical race theory have no awareness of what's happening in the classroom.
And also, I will just say, no awareness of what, and I mean, and like you and I are, neither of us, we're not philosophy majors, we're not lawyers, we're not sociologists, but like, also no awareness of what critical race theory is. Right. Like, I would wager that no one bitching about critical race theory can actually explain critical race theory.
No, because it's difficult to explain. It's a whole different, it's like a subset of thought. Anyway, so that happened this week. Also, I will add, this is not a personal complaint, but the process by which the State Board of Education released this information, I think, should change. So they technically followed the letter of the law, and I believe they did not uphold the spirit of the law, right? So the Open Meeting Act requires that they post the agenda to the meeting 24 hours in advance. They're not technically required to also post all of the supporting documents, handouts, or whatever that they would have. Now, often public entities do, right? Because it's just a packet that all the board members get. So like, here's the agenda and here's all the stuff we're going to talk about, including like proposed administrative rules. Well, they did not post the administrative rules until about 30 minutes prior to the meeting, which I am almost certain was like a way to like keep it back from the public and members of the media until the last minute, so they didn't have a lot of time to talk about it. But what it sounds like? It sounds like the way that the legislature handles the budget, where no one knows what it says till they get there to vote on it, and they're like, let's pass it out real quick. All right, y'all, let's vote. And it's like, well, hang on.
Yeah.
This is $8 billion. Let me look at this for a minute before we vote.
It's some bullshit.
Yeah, that's right. That's some bullshit.
It's some shenanigans.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on. I'm getting all tense about this.
Dude, what is happening in Western Heights?
Well, yeah, so Western Heights, which everyone always asks, where is Western Heights?
It's that way.
Yeah, it's southwest of Oklahoma City. I think it's south of Mustang, or out that way.
Yes.
So they were also a subject of conversation in the last several state board of education meetings, because there's been some mismanagement of their school district. And I don't offhand have all the details on that, but Scott, you're clicking your mouse quite a bit over there, so maybe you've got it pulled up.
I was looking up to see where Western Heights is exactly on the map.
Okay,
so
great.
I can give people an exact location. So Western Heights High School is on Southwest 44th. And it's gonna be like Southwest 44th and Council. So yeah,
okay, yeah. So kind of east of Mustang, but south of I-40.
Yeah,
and that's actually where I thought it was, and someone else told me south of Mustang. They were
wrong.
Right,
so you know where the Hobby Lobby corporate office is?
It's down. Honestly, it's down by the landfill.
Yeah,
Landfill's
so it's near. This is near the airport. Actually,
west of the airport, about 3 miles. Yeah,
yeah.
There's a landfill at Rockwell and Southwest 15th.
Yep.
One of the major landfills for Oklahoma City.
I have taken stuff there.
Yeah, same. Anyway, so the gist of this is that the decision several meetings ago from the State Board of Education was that the superintendent was fired, was terminated due to their mismanagement. Then Western Heights appointed a new superintendent, and the State Board of Education said, hold on there.
Whoops.
You guys have messed up. We are going to give you a superintendent to kind of get a handle on things, and we're going to give you one of our folks who has been Monty Guthrie. He's the Deputy Superintendent of Finance and Federal Programs for the State Department of Education. And so they installed him as an interim superintendent for Western Heights. And this week, Western Heights said, thank you, but no, you can keep your guy, and we're going to put in our person instead. And
did they have the legal authority to do that, Andy?
Well, we'll find out. So the board president nominated Assistant Superintendent Kim Race to the interim role. The board approved it 3-1. I guess they have an even number of folks on the board, which is odd. And
I don't think they have a full board right now.
Are they short of somebody?
Yeah, because they had quorum. So they had a meeting last night when this all happened, and they weren't sure if they were going to have quorum because they initially only had 2. Then a third one showed up, and so I guess they had 4 show up total. Mm-hmm. But I mean, if you got a quorum with 3.
That's 5.
I would say you got probably 5. So I think they're down a
short
board
one.
member.
Yeah. Well, so then the one dissenting vote said, Brianna Flatley is her name, and she said, quote, this is in the Oklahoman, I'm definitely worried that what just happened is illegal. We're going to see what happens next.
Well, they also apparently found a bunch of bags of shredded documents in a dumpster outside the administrative building, and the State Department of Education had to warn the district and say, just so we're clear, the shredding of documents is not legal, and these shredded documents appear to include checks and pay stubs and financial statements.
Yikes!
This is is this the Trump organization over here? What's happening?
Right. And it's been bad news bears, honestly, for Western Heights. They have lost 40% of their employees since the previous superintendent, Mannix Barnes, from when they took office in 2019. The district has lost almost half of their employees, which tells you something's going on. Really terrible academic results, absenteeism. Their enrollment fell by about a third over the past year, there was just stuff going on. And so the fact that the state had to step in and appoint somebody who they've now declined is a big deal. This doesn't happen all the time, and it's as a public school parent, like my heart goes out. Imagine those. I mean, there's like 3,000 students that are in schools out there.
Yeah.
All of those families who are just like, what is happening? Like,
Yeah.
we're losing our teachers. The superintendent's corrupt. The state's trying to help. Our state board doesn't, or our local board doesn't want it, even though clearly we need it. And so here we are. So we'll be, I don't know. I don't have any big advice, but if you live in Western Heights, we'd love to hear from you if you're a parent. And also, our hearts go out to you. Let us know if we can help.
So, kind of moving on, was there any McGirt drama this week?
Well, was there, Scott? Listeners, you may remember that last week we discussed the community impact panel that the governor had convened this past week in Tulsa, and we told you last week we'll see how it goes. And well,
It went.
It did not go well for Governor Stitt. The event was scheduled for 2 hours, and he ended it after an hour, so only halfway through. A lot of folks turned out, as it is. So as a recap, maybe we'll start here. It was the governor and a bunch of DAs, district attorneys, on stage. The tribes...
Attorneys district.
That's right, attorneys, yes. District's attorney. The tribes, and this was dealing with the McGirt ruling, so the tribes were not... Tribal leaders were not present. They weren't even formally invited. They, like the tribes' attorneys general or whatever their chief.
I think it's attorney generals.
No, it's attorneys general. That's
you
plural.
sure?
I don't think it's different if it's tribal. It's still attorneys
You're right.
general.
It is attorneys general. You're right.
Grammar knows no nation, Scott. But they, Scott's wife gestures at Andy, just for the record. Point. I'm going to have to do some kind of ta-da sound here. Yeah. So our rim shot. That's what I needed. There we go. Yeah. Anyway, so attorneys general from the tribal nations, received an email that was basically an FYI, save the date. Hey, please come to our community impact forum where we're going to talk about how terrible you are. And so that event came. A lot of folks turned out. A lot of tribal members attended. And the governor, this part cracks me up. This is honestly so bad that it's funny. The governor said in the meeting, well, I think there's a lot of people here that aren't from Oklahoma. Listen, man, I guarantee
every single person in that meeting was from Oklahoma.
The McGirt ruling only affects Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And the tribes don't have the time or the money or the effort to go find foreign actors to come in here, right?
Right.
This isn't. Whenever someone says, I think this is a lot of folks that aren't from here, they're generally wrong, right? It's.
Yes. And, so, we started off by saying that this forum, well, and so the forum kind of devolved into, a lot of shouting, a lot of kind of protesting. I would say, I mean, do you think that there's any level at which this was constructive?
Well, yes and no. So one of the news stations carried a story that the headline and the way it was written sounded to me, my perception was that it was exactly the news story that the governor wanted. So to answer your question, I think it was there on some level. It fulfilled the governor's goals for the event.
Right. And so this was the point that I was going to make, because there was a lot of social media chatter about there were some tweets about man, whoever plans these events for the governor is really bad at their job, or the governor's really bad. And then there was some pushback saying, are you kidding? This is exactly what he wanted. Right. What he wanted was video of a rowdy crowd shouting him down that he can say are protesters and radical leftists and Antifa, right, and people not from Oklahoma. Right. And then it's pitting this us against them. It feeds in to this us against them narrative. And it feeds into this law and order narrative. I think I mean, I don't know. I'm not in the governor. The governor doesn't talk to me before he plans to do shit. I wish he did, but he doesn't. I think this might have gone exactly the way they expected, and it might have gone even exactly the way they wanted it to.
Right.
Right. Like, they weren't wanting a constructive conversation about the impact of McGirt. They were wanting video of people yelling and screaming and protesting that they can use in a campaign ad.
Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent they probably wanted to hear from victims like their horror stories about things.
But I mean, my question and answer, this is not rhetorical. Are there any?
I don't know.
Like, has anybody been let out of prison from McGirt?
Well, yes, I think a couple of people have, but I don't think it's very long. I don't quote me on this.
Like, I honestly don't know, but like my understanding was that there's a bunch of convictions that have been overturned,
but they've almost
always the person is then charged with the same or similar crime in federal court, and they'll have to be tried again.
Right. And in many cases that process is started proactively, as we discussed last week, week before.
To the extent so far that there are victims of the McGirt decision, it's the FBI and U.S. attorneys that operate in eastern Oklahoma because their offices are overwhelmed with these cases.
Right.
Right?
So the other thing I was going to say, and listeners, all the links to these stories will be in the show notes, but this week the FBI said they anticipate that there will be 7,500 new cases in federal court next year as a result. So these are roughly 7,500 people that were convicted in state courts in Oklahoma that will have to be retried in federal court. However, it is unlikely they would be released. I think, if I'm being honest, Scott, if you're the victim of a crime, right? Like, let's say your family member was murdered, you were raped, your wife was raped, like these things, and that person,
something terrible happened.
Yes, and that person who has been convicted on it gets that released from, we'll say, state. It's overturned from the state courts.
Sure.
Does
that take away your closure?
Well, yeah. That's exactly right. So even if they're rearrested, they are not yet convicted in federal court. And if there's a delay in between these things, there's a chance that they could be released. And that could be an understandably very scary thing.
100%. And if that starts happening, then we should figure out what needs to be done. Is that a resource problem? Is that a process problem? Is it both?
Right.
But unless I'm missing something, that hasn't actually happened yet. Right?
Right. No, my understanding is that it hasn't.
And I understand that the anxiety. I understand the anxiety of the families who are put through the idea of that these people are going to have to undergo another trial, 100%, and nothing. There's, I don't have any idea how I would feel if I was one of those people. Right?
Yeah.
But the facts are that according to the Supreme Court, all of this was done improperly. And in our system, in our system of government that operates with laws and that operates with rules, you don't get to just say, we're going to do it this way because it's easier and more convenient. You do it the way the law says.
Right.
And the Supreme Court said that the law wasn't followed, that this was done improperly, and so you have to go back and do it over again.
Right.
Right? And the answer to that is not, in my opinion, what the governor says, which is to you just need to get the Supreme Court to overturn McGirt.
Right. So
which one I think, I'm not a Supreme Court expert, but and I also want to say too, I'm not saying one way or the other. McGirt was decided 5-4. I think had it been argued in front of a different panel of justices other than the 9 that it happens to be argued in front of, it could just as easily have been argued. It could have gone the other way.
Well, that's what he's hoping, right?
Right. Yeah, but I don't think that. But my point is, I'm saying this was a very closely decided case. The McGirt decision could have gone the other way. But easily.
Also, it has gone through several levels to get to the Supreme Court. This is not a new case.
But the point that I'm trying to make is that generally speaking, even in issues that are very contentious, the Supreme Court doesn't go back and overturn a decision
right.
that it has just recently made, even if that decision was close.
Right.
There was a recent case in, I'm going to get it mixed up with the states. One case was in Louisiana, one case was in Texas. Both of these cases had to do with abortion. And there was a challenge to an abortion law. And this year, like the last term, there was a challenge to an abortion law that I think was in Louisiana, and the court didn't even I forget if they didn't take it up or if they ruled in favor of the abortion clinic. And John Roberts, I think, wrote the majority opinion and was like, "Look, I'm not in favor of this, but we decided this exact issue 2 years ago, and we're not like, I thought that," and John Roberts wrote in the opinion, "I thought that decision was wrong, but that was the decision."
Right.
And we don't go back and undo shit that we did 2 years ago.
No, because we need some
stability, predictability.
Yes.
And so I think if the governor, McGirt is the decision, good, bad, or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the governor is mistaken if he thinks that even the present court is going to undo that.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And I think I'll be thoughtful in how I phrase this. I agree with you that we have to respect the rule of law. I agree that the Supreme Court does not usually, and arguably should not, waffle on their decisions shortly after they've decided them, right? Because then people will keep challenging it. This is like, as a parent, you've got to let your yes be yes and your no be no and stick with it so that your kids aren't just still standing there trying to argue their point. Thirdly, I agree, or I will admit, as we just discussed, that I think for a lot of crime victims, as we just said, it is certainly this time of uncertainty can be scary, and rightly so, right? I will add to that I think the approach to this is entirely wrong, right? I think the governor's approach to this is way wrong. To the way that you said, his goal to get it overturned, I think is misguided. There are, and I will say, I believe there to be more productive paths to a remedy here than to just digging your heels in and trying to say, nope, I want it overturned, right? There is a path to facilitating a transition from people who have been convicted in state court to having them be retried and reconvicted in federal court. There's a way to do that, to make it easier, to make it faster, to make it, to grease the wheels of bureaucracy.
To do it in a way that doesn't re-traumatize the victims and their families.
And to alienate hundreds of thousands of Native Americans, right? Especially for a guy who is going to be running for re-election, potentially the presidency someday, right? The fact that he is willing to burn these bridges for what end, right? There's a mutually agreeable goal here that I think he and I and you and a bunch of folks agree on, but his approach to it is to go it alone, and that's not the way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we agree. Great.
Agreed.
Listeners, let us know how you feel. We'd love to know if you agree or disagree. I'm sure some of you will, and that's always exciting. You can send an email to podcast@letsfixthis.org or hit us up on Twitter. All right, Scott, let's pivot back to education. I feel like we're both a little
scatterbrained.
Well, no, I was going to say salty. A little salty this week.
Yes. Salty is my new permanent state, I think.
It is. I saw do you follow Poorly Drawn Lines on Instagram?
Yes.
Birds and bears and all that. It's a great comic. It's at Poorly Drawn Lines. There was the one the other day of the bird, I think, and he was saying, everyone thinks I'm angry. I'm just concerned. And I was like, yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I'm going to put that on my wall. So news this week about Epic Charter Schools. There'd been a brief lull in news about them, but they're back. It was actually a story in the Frontier that was very well reported and pretty interesting, I think. And honestly, not this isn't a story that like got my fires burning, which was nice. It was just a interesting read because as you all know, like Epic Charter Schools ballooned in the pandemic with huge enrollment, and at the same time, there's a bunch of investigations, state auditor looking into it because the way that they had it structured was basically millions of dollars of state money was going to Epic Charter Schools
with no accountability and oversight.
Right, and then being funneled into this company called Epic Youth Services for quote management expenses, like $45 million, right? Like a lot of public money.
What do you think they bill by the hour?
I don't know, but it all went to a black box. One yacht per hour, right? And so they, over the last several months, the Frontier has interviewed like 12 or 13 former staff members and maybe board members, I forget it all. But they put together a bunch of interviews including like their superintendent and that kind of stuff. And really wanted to dig in and find out like what happened and what led to Epic Charter Schools separating from these two guys that founded the whole deal. Where did this line come that you wanted to move away? Those two founders, of course, decided not to. They declined to, didn't respond to the interview. Right, yeah.
They didn't want to go on the record?
Right, yeah. But it was really interesting. It's a really good read if you haven't read it already, to look into it. There's kind of too much to go point by point, person by person. But it was a really interesting description from the inside of how this all went down. And honestly, my takeaway, Scott, and I'd love to hear yours, but my takeaway was like, once everything was brought into the light, the board did the right thing. They were like, oh man, okay. You know what? Like, we didn't pay close enough attention. The auditor brought it out, and we only had one decision, like one option available, and that was to part ways. And so we did.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that I don't know that Epic is like where it needs to be yet, but I think that they are on the road.
Mm-hmm. And I was even happy, I guess happy is the right adjective. I was relieved, I don't know, something, to hear some of the staff, they were like, were you guys prepared for this dramatic increase in students? And some of the former staff were like, no, not remotely. Which, of course not. Why would they be? It's not like any school district, real or virtual, could immediately absorb a 50% or 100% increase in enrollment, right? Like that's just not how that works. So I think it's a good article. We'll leave it at that. Scott and I agree. Good, we're in agreement. And then
before our very last story,
yeah,
can I share one thing that just came across the news desk now?
Yeah.
Beep 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 beep.
I've got a news thing here. Yeah.
There has been a case in Dallas of a rare disease called monkeypox that has been reported.
This is what we need.
So this is like it's kind of in the same family, I think, as like the chickenpox, the other pox viruses, but it's primarily in monkeys, but it can be transmitted to humans.
Isn't chickenpox the same as shingles?
No, not exactly.
Really?
No.
I thought it was the same virus.
It's Zoster, but like the disease process isn't the same.
Isn't Zoster a brand of hair clippers?
No.
That's Oster. Okay.
So this person has monkeypox. They are in the hospital. They're stable. They flew from Nigeria.
Wait, flying monkeypox?
They flew from Nigeria to Dallas via Atlanta. This is a very rare disease. It spreads mostly via respiratory transmission is the primary mode of transmission. However, apparently, experts in such things are saying that the risk of spread is pretty low. Do you know why?
I'm reading it's a double-strained DNA.
I mean, all that's not the reason why.
I don't know the real reason, no.
Because masks are required on flights.
Oh.
So because we still have masking on flights, it is possible that we will not see an outbreak of monkeypox in Dallas, because assuming that this person was complying with the mask mandate,
right,
and that flight attendants were enforcing that, as they tend to do. So we could have just been spared an outbreak of monkeypox here in the good old U.S. of A. Because of mask wearing.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Masks prevent monkeypox.
They do.
I honestly, I mean, the folks from East Asia have had this figured out for literally decades, right?
Yeah.
Generally, if you're in the airport and you see someone wearing a mask pre-COVID, it was likely they were of Asian descent. Is that a fair statement? And I honestly wish that masks were less politicized for lots of reasons, not the least of which is that I think it's a smart thing when you're traveling. Everyone who travels gets sick, man. Every time I fly somewhere, I get sick, and I'm just going to start wearing a mask from here on out. I've got a couple of flights coming up, I think, and I'm just going to wear a mask and wash my hands more than I normally do. It's just good hygiene.
Yep.
No one likes to go on vacation and be sick when you get there, right?
But interestingly, my lovely wife, Ashley, spent a big chunk of her childhood overseas in a place with lots and lots of monkeys. She grew up in Indonesia. And they think that she had monkeypox as a child.
Really?
Yeah.
We should get Ashley on the show. Ashley's in the other room listening to us talk about herself with monkeypox right now. So, listeners, you heard this. Ashley had monkeypox. All right. Well, let's pivot very quickly and end on a positive note. And Scott, that note is that the U.S. Mint, a federal agency, which I don't believe we've ever discussed on the podcast before, they have announced three new designs for new quarters that will be released next year. And these quarters feature Oklahoman and former chief of the Cherokee Nation, Wilma Mankiller. Very exciting.
That is great news.
There haven't been that many women on quarters or any coin for that matter.
Been any Native women?
There's not on quarters. There's the Sacagawea dollar.
Yeah.
Yeah. But to my knowledge, that's the only two, I think. So this is pretty exciting.
Very cool.
I think it's exciting for the Cherokee Nation. It's exciting for women. It's exciting for Oklahoma.
And for America.
That's right. Because, I mean, all the reasons. Listeners, you get it. You get it. Okay. On that note, we'll wrap up. Thank you for being here again. This week, we've got some really great guests lined up this summer. Sarah Jane Rose from Sally's List, Amanda Ewing from OEA, a bunch of others that I'm looking at my list. Julia Kurt, current state senator, will give us a bit of a recap on how this session went and what to look forward to next year, as well as others. If you are interested in joining us, please let us know. I'd love to have some guests. I've had a couple of members of my family asked to be guests. Scott, maybe we should have an all in the family episode and get your parents and my parents. And that could
evolve quickly.
It's just a barbecuing podcast, just like God
I'll have to
intended.
decide if that would necessitate more or less booze.
That's fair. All right, listeners, have a good weekend. Stay warm or cool or whatever the weather is where you're at.
Get vaccinated and wear your masks.
That's exactly right. And don't forget that decisions are made by those who show up. Have a good week.